Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children. This is Jim Donavan. I'm reporting from my office, my real office, not my home office. It is currently 10 a.m. I never get walk-ins. That should have been my clue that something was wrong. A tall, gorgeous blonde in a green blouse and dark brown skirt walked into my office and held open my door. She didn't knock, as most people do when they're not certain if a door is locked or not. She just strode confidently in. If I were a cartoon wolf, my eyes would have popped out of my head and I'd have started howling. As it was, I think my mouth was a bit agape, and I stared at her for too long without saying a word. She had her golden hair immaculately coiffed so that she looked like she was a 1940s pinup model. I've always loved the hairstyle of the 1940s. Man, why can't we bring that back? Yeah, if I describe her anymore, I'm pretty sure I'm going to add it to a list somewhere. I'm not sure how long I was entranced, but it was easily measured by seconds. And I would have kept staring too, if another woman hadn't walked in behind her. Much plainer, mousy brown hair, dull eyes. She was wearing mom jeans, and while she looked fit, at least as fit as anyone can in mom jeans, I think she was just skinny rather than muscularly skinny. I'm sure she'd look perfectly fine walking down the road, but next to the peak of feminine beauty, she looked like a cat that had been run over on the freeway. The second woman looked as nervous as the blonde bombshell looked confident. Of course she had to speak first. Excuse me, are you Officer Donavan? Mister. I'm only affiliated with the police. I don't work for him. Call me Jim. She blushed for some reason, and then just started to contemplate her shoes and the worn thin carpet that I used to decorate my office. Her far more attractive friend patted her on the shoulder and said, I'm Lily, this is Anne. We're here because you are a detective? Well, that's what the sign says on the door, I replied. I then remembered that I don't actually have my name and occupation written on the door. Anne started to look at the door she was holding to check, but I quickly said, why don't you two ladies have a seat? I gestured to the comfortable rolling chairs that I'd set up on the opposite side of my desk. I may not get walk-ins, but I always wanted to have comfortable chairs in my office, and a beautiful woman to sit in one for a case. I don't always get to appreciate a plan going this swimmingly. Anne swiveled one of the chairs around so she could sit in it, and let out a scream. My emerald green lizard, Lizzie, who was easily the size of a beagle, raised her head and let out a long, squeaking sound. I stood up from behind my desk and walked briskly over to pick her up. The lizard, not the woman. Whoop, sorry. I brought my pet to work. She doesn't like being left alone in my apartment with my roommate, so I let her watch me do paperwork. Don't worry, I'm pretty sure she doesn't bite. Oh, it's okay. I'm just a little jumpy these days, I guess, Anne said, sitting down once I moved to the other side of the desk holding Lizzie. I was petting her head like a Bond villain would a cat. Lizzie made a gurgling noise that I was assuming was her version of a purr. She, Anne, not the lizard once again, actually paused for a second and started crying. I thought she was faking it, but I'm not good with women. It's possible this is real. I felt awkward. Lily put her arm around Anne and comforted her. Hey, it's okay. Why don't I talk to him, okay? Anne nodded through sniffling tears. I opened a drawer from my desk and lobbed a box of generic brand tissues to Lily. She caught it without even looking and handed it to Anne. Badass and hot. I'd have to work hard on this case to impress her. Either way, she looked back at me, noticed I was staring at her, and quirked a little eyebrow raise to match a faint smirk. So, I'm a longtime friend of Anne's and her new husband, Steve. I've known them since I started dating. Ever since they got married, though, Anne and Steve have been seeing something every night, like a ghost shimmering in the room over the bed. I've been Anne's roommate since before they were married, and I've seen some weird things, too. Let me guess, I interrupted. Usually comes around midnight? Lily looked to Anne, who nodded through her snuffling. Not uncommon, I said. Ghosts tend to start haunting at midnight, whereas demons are a little bit more active around 3 a.m. Why? Anne asked, miserably. Something about being between life and death, like midnight is between night and morning, I replied. There are rules under, normal circumstances. Now help me out here. Was there ever a violent death in the house or apartment that you're currently living in? House, Anne said. And no, I don't think so. My family's lived there for a while, and my parents left it to me and Steve, and... Steve and I? Steve and me, Lily interrupted. Anne nodded her thanks. Steve and me, when they were ready to retire. I never noticed any ghosts when I was growing up there. Okay, well, there are some other options. Here I sighed very deeply. It's going to require me to stay over at your place and see the apparition myself. I'll be able to tell if it's something directly attached to you, vengeful spirit I'm willing to move on, or something else entirely. A vengeful spirit? Anne asked, worriedly. Well, I sighed again, sighing a lot in this case. Sometimes when a person dies, they don't want to move on to heaven or hell, and a part of who they were gets left behind. This usually happens in violent death situations, where the cause of death is sudden and unexpected. The ghost will often linger around family members, or even to torment the person who's responsible for their death. I've never killed anyone, Anne said, suddenly very defensive. I never said you had, I soothed. Something ticked there. Sometimes ghosts, like people, are stupid, or don't have all the facts, so they may attribute blame where there is none. Either way, need to be at your house. Now these hauntings, have you noticed a pattern beyond time of night? For instance, a specific day, or maybe a person that the ghost will latch onto? Me. Always me. Anne sobbed. Oh boy, this was going to be exhausting. I know how these cases go. The more emotionally involved a person is, the more the solution to the case is going to suck. We settled the details and agreed on my retainer, and we decided that I'd come by tomorrow to their house in Porter Ranch. It's a nice area, near Rosita, which is, of course, famous for the movie The Karate Kid and the far superior follow-up, Cobra Kai. The rest of LA County treats Rosita as the white trash dumping ground, but Porter Ranch, by contrast, is where we keep some of the old rich. The nouveau riche tend to focus around Beverly Hills, Thousand Oaks, etc. But Porter Ranch, that's where the people who know what money is for live. I drove my dilapidated old Camry to the house, parked on the street. My engine taps violently because I forgot to change my oil about 10 years back, and a piston warped abysmally. It causes my valves to leak something fierce, which is always fun for knowing the upper crust. Oh, and is that an asphaltless road? Oh no. After I stepped out of my car, I looked up and down the street. Teslas and BMWs as far as the eye could see. Oh, perfection. I walked up with my overnight bag in hand and knocked on the door. Had a bit of a memory flashback to the Red Coals Black Shadows case from last year. There were definite similarities, so I had readied myself for either kind of spiritual warfare. Specifically, I had started praying and began fasting immediately after she left. I know I'm not in the best place, spiritually speaking, but after the case back in Christmas and the warnings from my guardian angel during the Loki case, I knew the Most High had, well, I just had to not be an idiot about it, okay? Either way, the previous time that I suspected demonic or ghost activity, I walked in without preparing my soul, and I nearly died. I wasn't going to be nearly as foolhardy this time. As I was doing my fast, I went to my contact in the Vatican, Father Smith. He provided me with a gallon of water and salt that had been sanctified for exorcism. For the water, I loaded some into a few water bottles and into a reasonably sized super soaker. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. It played the Star Wars theme. I love nerds who lack impulse control. Lily answered. She was wearing heels, so I had to angle up a bit to create eye contact. I knew she was tall when I met her in my office, but she was apparently closer to my height than I'd anticipated. Oh, hello, Mr. Donavan. Won't you please come in? Jim, please, I said as I stepped through the door. Very well, James, she purred. This behavior was not something I'm accustomed to. I grew suspicious, but then just brushed it off to general paranoia. Even though this is LA and I should be seeing them all the time, I don't have much cause to interact with beautiful women. I just wasn't used to typical flirtatious behavior. Well, Anne and her husband are in the basement, hanging a shelf, I think. Follow me. I did. It's a larger house than appeared from the outside. We walked down a flight of stairs, both of us having to duck a little so as not to hit our heads on the slanted ceiling. We came upon a very well-furnished den. In fact, it looked like the sitting room of an old English professor. 6-foot-tall bookcases lined the walls. In one corner was an elaborately carved wooden desk. And there were several chairs, and a couch that looked like it was intended to be, like a waiting room for a psychiatrist, rather than an actual comfortable place that a person might laze about. Anne, and a shorter man in the low 5-foot range, had stood back, and were looking at a wall. They appeared to be inspecting a shelf. "It's crooked," I said. Anne jumped around, startled, and noticed me. She gave a relieved smile when she saw me. "Thank you! That's exactly what I was saying!" her husband exclaimed. Then he turned around to meet me. He looked a bit shocked at how much I towered over him. I never try to use my height to intimidate shorter men when I can. They've got a higher life expectancy after all, and I don't want them to realize their natural advantage and dance a hornpipe on my grave. I stuck my hand out and gave him a big old golden retriever grin. "Hi there, name's Jim. Here to help you with your ghost problem." He ignored my hand, looked me up and down, and said, "Well, I don't know how you're supposed to help. You're not even from the Ghost Adventurers show." Lily cut the awkward silence that followed. "It sounds like you've got this well in hand. I've got to run, or I'll be late for work. To quote the old adage, I hate it when she leaves, but I love to watch her go." Turned back to see the husband looking at me the way men do when we're appraising another man's character. I shrugged. "Look, Steve, I'm not going to flash some fancy monitor around. I'm not going to run some sort of detection device that picks up electromagnetic pulses to see if there are any ghosts present. I'm not going to go, 'Is anyone there?' into an unnecessarily dark room. Your wife told me about a haunting, and it's my duty to see if it's actually hostile towards you guys, or just a boring old poltergeist that is more curious than anything else." "You don't know what this is already? You didn't tell him what it is, did you?" he said accusingly to his wife. It didn't seem relevant," she answered. "Okay," I sighed once again, really becoming a pattern with this case. "Let's assume I'm still here, that you can still talk to me directly, and that all information is relevant. Your lives, and even your mortal souls, are at stake here." Steve stared at his wife for a few seconds. She was silent, eyes downcast, and was holding herself. He turned back to me. "We already know what the ghost is and why it's here. Before we got married, Anne was pregnant. We didn't have the money to take care of a new baby, so she got an abortion. Ever since, we see ghostly apparitions of a baby. Though now it's been a couple years, the ghost has, I guess, grown into more of a toddler. It's horrifying," Anne said through chattering teeth. "It's not my fault. I couldn't take care of it. This is, oh man. I'd have to be delicate here. I've never worked at crisis pregnancy centers. I have friends that did. I've had friends that counseled women post-abortion. I silently said a quick prayer and proceeded cautiously. Okay. Now that I know a little bit more, I think I have an idea how to go about helping you. It does sound like a vengeful spirit, but it could also be a baby curious to meet its parents. I'll do what I can." At that moment, suddenly, a loud racket occurred in the floor above us. Anne shrank down and started hugging her legs. She made hysterical little hiccuping noises. Hysterical in the sense of freaking out, not in the sense of, she is suffering. I got upstairs and my eyes scanned everything. I found a living room, decorated with rich people furniture. Every dish was smashed on the floor. It looked like a tornado had hit. Yeah, that's about right, I guess. After helping clean up, well, Steve and I cleaned up, Anne's nerves were not doing good after so many months of this sort of thing. Much like the Red Coal's Black Shadow case, I knew there was nothing I could really do until bedtime. But I did go around the house, blessing it with holy water. It's not the faith of the residents that matter after all, but Jesus Christ. Perhaps it'd be enough. And since this isn't the end of the report, it wasn't. I told them to go to sleep, or try to. I would stay up and on hand just in case something happened tonight. Steve gave me some more sarcasm, but I reminded him gently that this ghost isn't going to care about me. He got it. I found myself in an easy chair down in the basement. I hadn't noticed it when I first walked in, but in this house full of ungodly rich people furniture, this was the sole bastion of sanity. It was upholstered in leather, but it was so stuffed, it felt like being hugged by an angel. I should know, as I've met my guardian angel. Apparently angels are huggers. Who knew? I waited, in the darkness. Felt thematically appropriate. I was sitting there with a holy water squirt gun. I was hungry because I was still fasting. It was quiet. I heard the deep bass ticking of some clock somewhere in the house, as though they had a grandfather clock somewhere, just thrumming away. I hadn't seen one, of course. There didn't need to be one. Midnight is its own time, and it comes no matter what a man-made clock says. 12 chimes echoed out. Midnight. Each one deep, loud, and mournful. It seemed to stretch out forever. I heard a giggling voice, high-pitched but wavering, as though through some sort of distortion. I heard a toddler, wobbling around, running into things. Its laughter was equal parts scream as it was glee. I couldn't see anything. I stood up out of the chair and stalked around. I stopped hearing the toddler. I started hearing a heartbeat, as though it were distorted in a broken speaker or underwater. I saw flashes of dark red light, as though a camera were flashing, but only used a red bulb. It started to take on a strobe effect. I couldn't identify where it was coming from. There was no source to the light. It was just omnipresent. It did not dispel, but rather heightened the darkness of the room. "Hello, Jim." From behind, I heard a familiar, sinisterly melodic voice say my name. "How wonderful to see you again." I prepared myself, but I still took in a breath like someone punched me in the gut. Before me, on the ground, was the ghost toddler. He was the source of the red light. And the strobe effect came from 1,000 million motes of red light flashing out from his form and creating for him a body. Every once in a while, the light would bleed off and leave behind it a trail into nothingness. It had 2 ebon pools where its eyes should have been. "Hello, Loki," I said through gritted teeth. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Ah, well, I owed Molech a favor, and what better pastime is there than taunting a woman for years with her greatest sin? Well, this is more of a job I delegate to one of my underlings, but when I heard you were coming, I just had to stop by and greet you in person." I leveled the holy water squirt gun at him. He squirmed away. "I see. We're escalating things, are we? Then allow me to escalate further. Walk out of this house right now, Jim, or I will peel the skin from this lovely couple's bones." "What about the rules, Loki? You said it to me yourself 8 months ago. You're bound by rules that even you can't break." "They are mine, Jim. I can do with them as I please whenever I please. I have the right to be here, so it is I who write the rules." Still keeping the toy trained on the ghostly image of the toddler, I fished around in my pocket for the notebook where I had written the Latin rite of exorcism that I had learned from Father Smith. Suddenly standing in front of me, the toddler shape had swelled to 8 feet tall, and it bent over and whispered in my ear barely an inch away, and there was no breath. "That will not work, Jim. The soul must be penitent, and she never will be convinced she did anything wrong in slaying her child." The head pulled back and stared at me, emotionless pools of utter blackness looking right into me. "I'm just getting her prepared for eternity, Jim. Though, I suppose since you're here, I should make myself less known, lest I scare her into his arms. Thank you, Jim. You've done me a great service, and her an immeasurable disservice." I blasted him square in the face with the holy water squirt gun. Despite Loki surely having no physical body, the water made contact with him, as it was a substance more real than reality, and he recoiled in pain and terror, screaming as he tried to wipe off the water that had burned bright as white phosphorus. I ran up the stairs to the master bedroom. I threw open the door. Anne woke up screaming, while her husband leaped out of the bed and interposed his body between his wife and the freshly opened door. "It's Jim. Anna, you need to stop screaming right now and listen to me." No good. She started hyperventilating. I should have been more tactful in how I entered their room, I guess. "Come for your wife right now, or that thing that haunts you will kill you." Well, that made her panic all the more. She started letting out short little screams between hiccups. I really don't understand women. Steve, however, knew exactly what to do, and he slowly got back into bed, held his wife, and whispered, "It's okay, Anna. I'm here. We're going to fix this. You're safe. I'm here. You're safe. I'm here." He did that over and over again until she calmed down. Took about 15-20 seconds. I was starting to get nervous that Loki would make good on his promise, and started squirting all 4 walls, thresholds, and all the corners of the room with the holy water squirt gun. I prayed over the room, and once Anne calmed back down, I walked back to the foot of the bed and said, "The thing that has been haunting you isn't a ghost. It's also not your baby. It is a prince of demons, and he is here to torment you, probably hoping you'll eventually snap and kill yourself." She drew in a sharp breath at that. Steve asked, "What can we do?" I pointed at her and said, "It's only what she can do. I cannot cast out this demon unless you confess your sin and ask God for forgiveness." Anne said, "But I didn't do anything wrong." I sighed once again and said, as gently as I could, "You fornicated, got pregnant out of wedlock, and then rather than carry the baby to term, you killed him. Your baby was a boy, wasn't he? If you do not admit this, the demon will stay." "No, no," Anne said sternly. "I couldn't take care of it. I didn't kill anything. It wasn't alive anyway." "It certainly wasn't by the end of it," I said. Anne's panicked eyes focused on something behind me, and all the blood left her face. "Jim." I heard my name whispered through the door. A ghostly speckled red hand beckoned me to exit. "It's time to go home, Jim. I need some alone time with these two." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry," Anne screamed suddenly. She had thrown her hands over her head and began sobbing hysterically. "Oh, God, I'm sorry. I killed my baby." She started hiccuping. "I killed my baby. I killed my baby. I killed..." And then she started weeping uncontrollably. I looked back at Loki and said, "In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." He hissed and said, "Yes, I know the drill. This isn't over, Mudman. You take prey from me. I take something from you." And he disappeared. I led them in the sinner's prayer right then and there. Without confession, without repentance, without forgiveness, Loki could and would come back with 7 more demons and do the exact threats he promised. I blessed the house as best I could and made an appointment for a pastor recommended by Father Smith to come finish the job, help the couple. At least they agreed to go to a church. Here's hoping they meant it. It's not over, though. I got a call yesterday from Anne, thanking me, explaining that Lily had never come back from work that night, asked me to look for her. I told her to call the police just in case, but I've opened the investigation on my side. In a city like Los Angeles, it's almost impossible to find a missing person. But if anyone can... Oh, it feels good to have a win control. I've needed one. And when I find Lily, that'll be another win. Till next time, this is Jim Donavan. Over and out. Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ken Dickerson and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.